The silence did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated, year by year, choice by choice, until it became heavier than confession. Erika Kirk stands at the center of a life carefully arranged to look complete, while something unnamed presses from beneath the surface, demanding acknowledgement. The moment that fractures everything is not public, not loud, not dramatic by spectacle. It is private, a realization that arrives too late to undo, yet too early to ignore. From the outside, her story reads as restraint, discipline, dignity. Inside, it feels like erosion. The film opens on aftermath rather than beginning. An older woman confronting the cost of emotional survival, revisiting decisions made in the name of stability, protection, and silence. What was preserved and what was quietly sacrificed no longer feels abstract. Memory becomes unreliable not because it fades but because it sharpens. Certain moments refuse to soften with time. Others finally reveal what they were concealing. The question that hangs over every frame is not what happened, but why it remained unspoken for so long. Was silence an act of strength, or simply fear disguised as composure? And when a life has been built on endurance, what happens when endurance is no longer enough? The present does not announce itself with noise. It arrives quietly, settling into the corners of Erika Kirk's days like dust that cannot be wiped away. The camera finds her in stillness. A room lit by late afternoon, curtains unmoving, the faint hum of a distant street pressing against silence. Time has slowed here, not because life has eased, but because reflection has taken control. Every pause invites memory, and memory no longer asks permission. Erika moves through familiar routines with practiced restraint. Hands fold letters she no longer rereads. Shoes are placed neatly by the door she rarely rushes through. These gestures once signified order. Now they feel like evidence. The emotional conflict is not visible, yet it is constant. The tension between the woman she became and the truths she postponed until postponement hardened into habit. Psychologically, awareness arrives late and without mercy. Pain that once felt manageable gains weight because it finally has context. Achievements line the walls of her life, but they seem distant, almost borrowed, as if they belonged to someone who knew how to move forward without looking inward. The narration lingers on the subtle realization that endurance can become a form of disappearance. Ordinary details turn intrusive. A chair across the room suggests conversations that never reached completion. A quiet phone implies relationships defined more by absence than loss. Erika does not grieve catastrophes, she confronts omissions. What was never said begins to feel louder than anything that was. Night settles gradually, changing the texture of the room. Lamps cast narrow pools of light that refuse to fill the corners, and shadows stretch as if they have been waiting. Erika listens to the sounds of a building at rest, pipes cooling, a neighbor's footsteps overhead, the distant siren that fades before it arrives. These sounds do not disturb her. They mirror her interior, where feeling has long been muted rather than healed. Her posture remains composed, shoulders steady, breath measured, yet beneath that control is a fatigue that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with restraint maintained too long. Memory circles without landing, returning to moments she once dismissed as minor, realizing now they were crossroads disguised as ordinary days. Each one quietly reinforcing the lesson that speaking cost more than staying composed. That lesson hardened into instinct permanently. The film does not accuse, it observes. Strength, once her defining trait, begins to look indistinguishable from avoidance. The emotional architecture of her life reveals itself slowly, each choice built on the belief that silence preserved stability. That composure prevented collapse. That enduring quietly was a moral achievement. Foreshadowing enters through unease rather than event. Erika senses that the story she told herself is incomplete. That something essential was delayed, not resolved. The present tightens, narrowing her ability to look away. In the final moments, she stands suspended between recognition and resistance, confronting the question that refuses to retreat. Where did this silence begin? And who taught her it was safer than truth? Childhood returns without warning, not as nostalgia but as atmosphere. The house is quiet in a way that feels intentional, rooms arranged to discourage lingering, voices measured to avoid disturbance. Erika, still small enough to believe tone matters more than meaning, learns to read the air before she speaks. Affection arrives sparingly, offered as reward rather than refuge, and she studies its patterns carefully, understanding that calm earns approval while emotion complicates everything. Fear is never explosive. It hums. It teaches vigilance. She watches adults navigate their days with practiced restraint, noticing how discomfort is swallowed, how questions are deferred. When disappointment appears, it is minimized, treated as inconvenience rather than injury. Erika absorbs the lesson quickly. Expression is not forbidden, it is simply unrewarded. Silence, however, brings order. Her inner world begins to thicken. Thoughts are stored rather than shared. Feelings are organized, ranked by risk. She becomes skilled at anticipation, adjusting herself before anyone asks. Praise follows. She is called mature, easy, strong. Each word reinforces the idea that self-erasure is virtue. The narration lingers on this misunderstanding, how approval quietly reshapes identity. Key moments pass without ceremony, a loss that receives no language, a sadness answered with practicality, a need met with distance instead of comfort. None of these moments announce themselves as wounds, yet together they construct a method for surviving unnoticed. Erika learns that harmony is her responsibility, that keeping things intact depends on her restraint. The environment offers no cruelty to rebel against, only absence to adapt to. In that absence, she becomes reliable. She becomes invisible by design. The child who rarely disrupts is the child who is rarely questioned, and safety settles into invisibility like a rule never spoken aloud. Foreshadowing emerges quietly. Silence begins to feel less like choice and more like identity. What once protected her now defines her edges, narrowing the space where authenticity might later exist. As adolescence approaches, the world opens outward, yet Erika steps forward carrying a belief she has never examined. That survival requires being unseen. And that visibility always comes at a cost she cannot afford. This belief settles deep, carried quietly into classrooms, friendships, early dreams, shaping posture, tone, expectation. She learns to disappear politely, to succeed without friction, to apologize for needs before they form. Adults mistake compliance for wisdom. Peers overlook her depth. Inside, she rehearses conversations she will never initiate, feeling safer as observer than participant. By the time childhood loosens its grip, the habit is fixed. Silence no longer feels chosen. It feels inevitable. That inevitability will guide every decision ahead, quietly determining who she becomes, and how much of herself the world is ever allowed to see fully. Adulthood arrives with velocity, doors open, schedules fill. Momentum replaces uncertainty, and for the first time the world responds to Erika Kirk with affirmation. Her life begins to take on a recognizable shape, measured progress, visible accomplishments, a trajectory that others admire. From the outside, it appears she has translated restraint into success, discipline into reliability. The architecture of her days is orderly, efficient, enviable. Inside, something else persists. Loneliness does not announce itself through isolation, but through distance. Erika is surrounded by people, colleagues, partners, acquaintances who trust her competence and admire her steadiness, yet disclosure remains absent. Connection stops short of depth. She is present without being known. The emotional conflict settles into contradiction. The more she achieves, the less space there seems to be for uncertainty, for weakness, for truth. She becomes fluent in performance. Professionally, she anticipates expectations before they are voiced. Relationally, she listens more than she reveals, offering reassurance without invitation. Emotionally, she calibrates herself to the comfort of others, maintaining equilibrium even when her interior drifts. The narration lingers on how mastery can become armor, how praise can reinforce the belief that composure is the only acceptable state. Key milestones pass with muted celebration. Promotions confirm her worth. Stability replaces struggle. Relationships form around dependability rather than intimacy. She is chosen for her steadiness, trusted for her restraint. Yet presence eludes her. In conversations, she notices how easily she deflects personal questions, how reflexively she turns attention outward. The habit is so ingrained it no longer feels deliberate. Psychological pressure accumulates quietly. Expectations rise, narrowing the margin for error. Success demands consistency, and consistency demands concealment. Erika senses that vulnerability would disrupt the image she has worked to maintain, not only in the eyes of others, but in her own. She fears that revealing uncertainty would unravel the logic of her life, exposing the sacrifices beneath the achievements. Even moments meant for joy feel distant. Celebrations blur together, achievements acknowledged and then set aside. The narration treats these moments with restraint, emphasizing how success can reflect absence as clearly as failure reflects loss. Each accomplishment highlights what remains untouched, unresolved. Foreshadowing sharpens as avoidance begins to strain. The emotional weight she has deferred grows heavier with each step forward. Small cracks appear, not dramatic enough to name but persistent enough to notice. A pause before answering a simple question. A sudden exhaustion after public composure. A sense that she is maintaining something rather than living it. The chapter frames success as a mirror. It reflects not only what Erika has gained, but what she has withheld. At the height of momentum, when her life appears most secure, a subtle fracture forms, an internal recognition that achievement cannot indefinitely contain unresolved truth. The realization does not yet demand action, but it refuses to disappear. It lingers, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment when performance will no longer be enough to hold everything together. The descent does not announce itself with loss or scandal. It arrives as contraction. Spaces grow smaller, calendars empty without explanation. Erika's world narrows until it consists mostly of interiors, rooms, thoughts, pauses between obligations that once gave her shape. Social circles thin not through conflict, but through quiet retreat. Invitations go unanswered. Conversations shorten. Emotional energy, once carefully rationed, now feels depleted beyond calculation. Fear changes direction. It no longer faces outward toward judgment or expectation. It turns inward, becoming reckoning. The silence that once protected her from disruption now presses against her from within, offering no refuge. Psychologically, the shift is disorienting. What once felt like control begins to feel like confinement. Erika senses a weight she cannot name, a gravity pulling her toward questions she has avoided for decades. Guilt appears without accusation. There is no single moment to apologize for, no obvious failure to amend. Instead, guilt settles as atmosphere, an awareness that something essential has been withheld, not from others but from herself. Grief follows without permission. It surfaces in unexpected moments. A quiet evening that feels heavier than it should, a familiar song that triggers a physical response she cannot explain. A sudden fatigue that sleep does not resolve. Key events are understated. She declines gatherings and is praised for knowing her limits. She withdraws from conversations and is admired for her composure. Strength is attributed to what is, in truth, retreat. The narration lingers on this misinterpretation. How isolation can masquerade as discipline, how silence can still be mistaken for maturity even as it corrodes meaning. Private reckonings intensify. Alone, Erika replays exchanges she once dismissed as insignificant, now recognizing them as opportunities for honesty she could not risk. She practices conversations that will never occur, imagining disclosures she still cannot voice. The camera holds on stillness, on her posture, her breath, the subtle tension in her hands, as if the body itself is carrying what language never allowed. Exhaustion becomes the dominant sensation. Not the tiredness of overwork, but the deeper fatigue of sustained self-management. Maintaining composure requires effort she no longer has. Meaning feels distant, as though it belongs to a life adjacent to her own. The narration treats this exhaustion with gravity, emphasizing that endurance, when prolonged beyond purpose, becomes erosion. Foreshadowing sharpens into clarity. Erika begins to understand that the silence shaping her life has changed function. What was once adaptive is now destructive. It no longer preserves stability, it undermines it. The realization does not arrive with relief, but with fear. To speak now would require dismantling the identity she has relied upon. To remain silent would mean continuing a slow disappearance. The setting tightens further. Even familiar spaces feel unfamiliar, as though they are waiting for a decision she has delayed too long. Erika senses that she is approaching a threshold, Not dramatic, but irreversible. The cost of endurance has become measurable. The weight of unacknowledged truth presses against her capacity to continue as she has. In the final moments of the chapter, she stands suspended between two paths that both demand sacrifice. One offers continuity without meaning. The other promises disruption without guarantee. The silence around her feels charged, no longer neutral, no longer safe. It asks something of her now. As the scene fades, the choice she can no longer delay comes into focus. Continue enduring, or finally listen to what the silence has been saying all along. The stillness returns, but it is no longer empty. It carries awareness now, a subtle shift in texture that changes everything without announcing itself. Erika Kirk remains surrounded by quiet, yet it feels altered, less like avoidance, more like space. The setting mirrors this transformation. Light enters the room without resistance. Shadows remain, but they no longer dominate. Time moves slowly, not because she is hiding from it, but because she is finally present within it. This chapter does not offer redemption. There is no dramatic release, no confession staged for relief. Erika does not inventory regret. Instead, she acknowledges consequence. The emotional tone is restrained, deliberate. Acceptance replaces defense, not as surrender but as clarity. She begins to see her life not as a series of mistakes, but as a coherent response to conditions she once lacked the language to challenge. Psychologically, this is synthesis. Strength and loss are held together without hierarchy. The endurance that once defined her is no longer dismissed, nor is it glorified. She understands now that silence shaped her, protected her, disciplined her, carried her forward when other options felt unsafe. But it does not have to dictate what remains. This realization does not arrive with certainty. It arrives with permission. Memory revisits earlier chapters of her life, but without accusation. Childhood restraint is seen with compassion. Adult composure is understood as effort, not failure. The narration lingers on this reframing, emphasizing how understanding alters the weight of the past without rewriting it. Erika recognizes that survival was never weakness, but she also recognizes that survival alone is not a legacy. Legacy, in this final movement, is reconsidered privately. Not in terms of recognition, reputation, or achievement, but through emotional honesty. What did her silence preserve? What did it prevent? These questions are not answered definitively. They are allowed to remain open, breathing. The camera observes her engaging in small acts of presence, pausing rather than deflecting, listening without retreat, allowing emotion to surface without immediate correction. There is no declaration of change, only evidence of it, a posture slightly less guarded, a breath taken without preparation, a moment of hesitation that does not end in withdrawal. These details matter more than resolution. They suggest a future not yet articulated, but no longer postponed. The film closes without certainty. Erika stands within a life that is still quiet, but no longer mute. The silence around her no longer demands endurance, it offers possibility. What remains unspoken is not absence, but choice. And as the frame fades, the question lingers, not whether the past can be reconciled, but whether the quiet, finally understood, will allow her to live differently with what time remains.